No.
Disappeared on us.
It's okay, more time for people to filter. The mic's working.
Okay. Okay.
I found it.
Oh, great, great.
I hid it.
These photographers.
I just got an action shot of her using a remote.
Let's see if it actually worked.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming here today. I've been really blown away by how wonderful this place is. I've known about Blue Sky for as long as I've been a photographer, and it was always a place I aspired to show it. It really was, just for the kind of work that the galleries seem to always lift up. And so it's a real pleasure, and just really great people here, and great community. So it's a real honor and pleasure for me to be here. And showing this work, which is something that's been kind of 6 years in the making, and very personal to me, and very, my wife and child are back there, and they're heavily prominently featured in the work. So I'm here to talk to you about Cartier-Bresson. I made that joke earlier.
We've got time.
I'd love to talk about this work in particular, but I think it might be worthwhile for me to talk a bit about my background in photography, the things that I'm interested in. And I love starting with this picture here by Bresson, taken in Valencia, Spain in 1933. Really, I read an interview with Todd Papageorge. He's a great photographer and great writer. And he described that he was a sort of a fledgling, a struggling poet, a poetry student in undergrad, and then came across this photograph and realized in an instant that what he was trying to do as a writer, as a poet, was what this photograph was also trying to do, just through kind of different means. But rather than the photographer having to labor over every next word, you took a picture and it either was or it wasn't, and that was really attractive to him. That was very attractive to me as well, but particularly the way in which I think photography kind of exists as kind of a visual poetry that's parallel to literary poetry. So I've always been attracted to photography's ability to elevate the mundane. That's always what seemed exciting to me. So just personally, the more eventful photography was, the sort of less I would be interested in it. It was a real beautiful idea to me that we could sort of illuminate our surroundings and kind of like pull back the veil on things, and in our mundane kind of like grinded out kind of daily existence, that photography could suggest that there was more there than we sort of realized could be experienced. And this was like a bolt of lightning. This silly 3-minute picture with the ice cream cone when I was a young photographer, and just the idea that it really was fascinating because of the actions of the photographer, where the photographer just simply chose to stand. It's all about organization and kind of visual alignment. And but the subject matter itself really had no inherent value. To me, because this was kind of a world that I understood. Now, if I was from somewhere completely different in the world, maybe this would be kind of exotic looking, but to me it looked like the Midwest where I was from, and it was incredible to me that he could sort of tease out this complexity out of what to me seemed like such a boring scene. So, all in all, I have a lot of commonalities with street photography, except I'm not a particularly good street photographer. So this is sort of like emblematic of my participation in street photography. That's about how comfortable I am getting in people's kind of personal space, And here's actually a picture of me from the field. This is me working. Just hiding that. But I sort of participate as a street photographer much of the time, kind of like trying to make those classical shots, but then inevitably it's really the things that exist kind of on the periphery of that activity that become the pictures, very often like the things that I don't even remember taking, almost kind of like a trick you play on yourself to like, oh no, I'm out here for this reason, but actually these other things are happening. this is a picture of my wife tearing down subway posters in Paris, to which the Parisians just have, they're not concerned at all, you know. I feel like here we would have ended up in jail maybe, but, so these, before I started photographing the family, I was very interested in photographing these kind of like, these liminal spaces, these kind of like spaces that you normally pass through. And these spaces, like my feeling is that when I can sort of find something, some sort of presence in these places, that it's really kind of meaningful to me, because they're the places that kind of most effectively elude my recognition, because I don't consider them, you know, they're places that I move through. And so I love photography in the way in which it's so incredibly generous, you know. It describes, you know, there's like 1,000 little leaves, like just on that one bush there. It's so generous in what it is interested in telling you. But then it also is like this tight-lipped, like keeper of secrets, you know? And so that tension, I think, is fascinating, like how a photograph can be so suggestive of something taking place or about to take place or something like that, but then ultimately, with all the information that it can deliver to you, not quite give you the information you need to resolve the narrative or to resolve what's being suggested. So that's a really interesting thing to me. And then, you know, over the years, I think visually the pictures have become, like, I've strived for more kind of visual economy and trying to make pictures where it's kind of like, what's the least amount that I need to sort of describe this scene. And, you know, what happens is, and these are pretty extreme examples, but just this feeling that day in and day out, I'm so connected to what everything means, like what everything's used for, like what a chair is actually used for, like what the purpose of it is. And it's a great pleasure to me to have those things kind of, to have those symbolic relationships stripped away, to just try to like activate other senses when looking at pictures, and to be able to look at a picture and maybe feel the texture of something, or even smell or hear or something, and get away a little bit from the feeling like the intellectual acknowledgement of what places are for and what that means, and that's a real pleasure to me. So I shoot fairly unhinged and then try to bring the pictures together later in projects where I may realize that I've got these facades taken in France over the years and try to create a series from that. But all in all, I'm just trying, I'm the kind of person that I feel weird not having a camera on me, you know. It's almost like a little like a security blanket or something. And so, because you never know when something might be in front of you that you just can't say no to. You just have to say yes to. So I, probably like many photographers, work from a process of like great distillation from a large amount of pictures. It's a phenomenal amount of failure, just an incredible amount of failure, you know, and I don't think that's uncommon for a lot of photographers. But then this slow kind of process of going through and reliance on the passage of time to tell me something about pictures. You know, very often the pictures that I think that I like early on end up to be of little consequence later, but rather the ones that I didn't see for 6 months or a year. And kind of keep on going and keep on going and keep on going until finally end up with some collection like this that represents a lot of unsuccessful pictures behind each one of these. I was always interested in photographing my family, perhaps not entirely just out of like I wanted to talk about themes of family dynamics or anything like that, but rather as an extension of my kind of just larger photographic practice. I try to take pictures every day, even if there's nothing really in particularly interesting to take pictures of. And I loved, so to me, when I saw photographers photograph their families, it was like the pinnacle of the mundane. Now, somebody's family may look very different than mine, and we all have different definitions of what's kind of everyday and mundane. But if I was interested in photographers who made the kind of ordinary extraordinary, then it was the family work seemed to be just an even more potent version of that. So photographers like Henry Wessel, I love that they seem to use the same pair of eyes when they photographed a bodybuilder at Muscle Beach, and when they photographed their own son, like in the shower, you know. And that was really exciting to me because photography could be not just about kind of creating a window in which you could sort of view some section of the world and understand something about that, but rather, you know, when I look at William Eggleston, it's like I get to walk around as him a little bit, and I get to sort of see what it's like to be him, you know, and this feeling that he can't quite decide on if the world is more beautiful or more strange, you know, and that's kind of like the tension. So here's a picture of Gary with a kid on his shoulders. And so I think when I was younger, I looked at those same family photographers and really like romanticized them as it being kind of like these pictures about love and appreciation of the family, or some sort of larger commitment to like, this is significant in my life, I want to talk about this. But I think as I've gotten older, part of me just feels like they didn't have a choice, you know, that there was just kind of no way out of it. So I love this picture of Gary photographing these businessmen here, actually taken by Henry Wessel as well. And so these photographers that I love, I love this Nixon photograph, I always have, because it's this combination of something so tender, but then also something so vulnerable, like as if like the mother is so protective of this child that like she can actually like hurt it, you know. And something really speaks to me about that contrast between those kind of opposing emotions. That there can be the experience of being a parent can be one of almost equal parts joy and fear in some ways. So Harry Callahan would have been another really big one. And as I was just talking to Chris about, you know, sometimes I think there's a lot of love in the way he photographs Barbara and Eleanor. But then also, I can't help but feel that the way he photographed them had something to do about just they were assisting him in his continued kind of exploration of photographic experiments. This photograph by Edward Meston of his son Neil has always stayed with me. And it's just, it's incredibly like, it's such an intimate proximity, and obviously the child is nude, but it's so formally driven. And so it may describe something very real about his son, but at the end of the day, it's the visual sensation. It's that black negative space by the hip, and that tension between that little hip and the way it comes so close to the side of the frame there. So, family pictures in general, photography has a really interesting relationship with records of the family. So this is a photograph this is my great grandmother here on a wagon in West Ireland, and it's remarkable that I know what she looks like. You know, this is a relatively new phenomenon, that we can know what our recent ancestors look like. And then so this woman who I never met, through the years, I have this idea about how she was and who she was through the kind of like basically just like a handful of pictures that exist, you know. So in the same way that I described sort of like when I go out, I kind of have this mindset like I'm going to make these kind of classical street photographs, and then things happen on the periphery of that. I approach photographing my family maybe almost first as like a family historian, and the significance of just creating a record of our young family. And so pictures like this, where we tried 4 different times to get a passport photograph of my oldest son. It's remarkable, it's incredible, this little sequence of images I mean, look how much that kid grew, you know? So I had the luxury of sort of understanding this work as having like this maybe even more important role in the creation of art, which was to create a record of these early years of my family. And with that, just the way I work, that's incredibly freeing to me. If I can convince myself that there's another purpose beyond the one that I'm actually doing. These are pictures. So this was not the first time I photographed family. This was done in undergrad, photographing my family, what do I call my old family? But my parents and my brothers and sisters at a time when the family was kind of going through some problems, and my parents were sort of becoming closer and closer to an inevitable divorce. And so in a way, I was always kind of destined to end up back at the same place, because there was these dynamics of my family that I didn't seem to have quite have access to before I had actually photographed them and slowed everything down and had these kind of like little elegant pieces of evidence to kind of reflect on. So when I met then my future wife, Vanessa, photographing her was just an extension of that daily process. And then as we started a family, that daily process would continue. So we get into the work of what we have here on display. And a lot of these pictures in this part of the slideshow are not in here, so I'm happy to share those. This was the first day we brought Wyatt home from the hospital, and I just felt an incredible, he's huge, right? He's really big. I hadn't really thought about it, even in this picture, he looks so big. He was born 10/7, you know? Yeah, when I heard all the doctors say, whoa, when they took him out. So, I felt an incredible compulsion to photograph everything about this new little life that I brought into the home. And then, you know, of course, my wife, who's an artist, she's kind of always involved, so that's her hand making a little claw shadow there for me. And I found myself photographing them in ways that I would never photograph anything. So almost as if I was photographing them like I was a medical examiner or something. But I couldn't explain it. And at the time, there was a lot of light kind of streaming into the house, like through the windows. And I just couldn't shoot enough. I couldn't stop shooting. I really couldn't. So that continued. And in these photographs, there's I'm torn. In every picture, there's kind of like a formal quality that I really appreciate. And then there's also like a indication of some aspect of my experience as a father, or some of the things that can be felt when having a child. So in this picture, part of me looks at this photograph of my young son, and I look at his like perfect but like very fragile body, and I just think about how beautiful but how kind of precarious it is. You know, it looks like he could be dropped into this thorny area. But then, the other part of me, probably the part of me that took the picture is can't believe how beautiful and bright the light is, and how it illuminates all those flowers, and how those flowers kind of roughly are the same tonally as like the clothes he's wearing, and how that pacifier seems to echo that shape of the flowers. And but the great thing about photography is that it can just be both. It's so generous. Like it holds all of that in there. So I can think about what it sort of feels like for these hands to be holding that life there, and what that means, and the fragility of that. But then I can also just relish in how wonderful it is to be able to see. It's great to be able to see. So the work continued, and I think that there ends up being, like a theme that runs throughout the work is this kind of a split between the dark and the light. So the pictures are often very luminous, but the cost of that luminosity is often like these deep, often kind of impenetrable shadows at times. And so it was really important to me, and I think this comes as an act of like editing, of like selection later on, that it could speak to that experience a little bit, which I felt very much, and I still feel that kind of like unimaginable joy, but then also like it's very scary, and this feeling that like there's been some mistake, and someone accidentally like gave me this child, and like we need to call somebody. And just the physical and kind of emotional exhaustion of that too, right? And so, part of the way I sort of understood the sequence of the show is that the earlier pictures are darker, and there's like much more that kind of can't be seen, and there's kind of more, there's more unknowing in the photographs. An analogy that I like, that I heard someone else talk about in an interview, is just, he was talking about the experience of holding a child on your chest at night, like in the bed, and then every few breaths holding your breath so you can make sure that the child is still rising up and down, And I really connected with that because it's it's so primal, I mean, day in and day out, I'm really considering pretty superficial, kind of inconsequential things, and then all of a sudden, we have these children, and everything seems very extreme, like these very dramatic extremes. So the way it really works is that cameras are kind of just strewn throughout the house. I still shoot film. I love film cameras. I love how there can be different formats. I love how the frame changes somewhat, and I shoot differently with a 35mm camera versus a 6x9 versus a 4x5. And we got them all over the house, And so very often, almost most of the time, these things are happening pretty organically, and so it's just about grabbing a camera that's kind of near. Yeah, that's right, Chris, you picked up on that. But occasionally there's a photograph like this that I kind of wonder about how it would be a little bit different. And so you may see that that one in the corner there is actually a remake of this photograph. And kind of to this day, I'm not sure which one I like better. But I'd say 95% of these pictures are taken as just kind of like responsive images at the scene. But occasionally, and usually with great failure, I try to recreate them. And typically, the more I want a photograph to work, the less it wants me, So there's a lot of things in these pictures that connect to kind of just my kind of long-standing kind of formal interest in photography. So just things like visual economy and trying to describe something with not as little information as possible, but trying to cut out excess when it's possible. And a photograph like this of Wyatt in the kiddie pool with these buckets, it seems to be connected to that Friedlander photograph of the ice cream cone cloud, and that it's really just about this feeling of things being more ordered than one realized, that there's like perhaps systems in place, that there's these elegant moments of grace that can occur in the world. And maybe it's some of our responsibility to just be receptive and just be available to receive those things when they present themselves. There's a way in which the pictures become classical in the posings. Like my son Wyatt, especially when I photograph him these days, he just always it's like he's in like a classical painting. And I don't know, my other son, he's just different the way he holds himself, and maybe I had some of those things in my mind. And there's also, the thing that's been kind of incredible to me is the limitations of the project. I just do so well with limitations as opposed to freedom in my practice. I love the limitations of film. I love that I have a certain amount of shots, and those shots are sort of connected to a financial sacrifice, and there's a threshold you cross where it becomes limiting, but the greatest limitations of this project were the fact that I was just never leaving the house, I mean, if we look around, the vast majority of these pictures were taken at our home. And so with that, it became sort of essential that I discovered new ways of creating these pictures, if only just to sort of allow them to not look like they were taken in the exact same place. But that was a really wonderful thing for me because I sort of didn't have a choice. I had to become a little bit more inventive visually, or the whole thing just wasn't going to work. And if the whole thing wasn't going to work, given that I couldn't really leave the house very much, then I wasn't going to be able to make work, and so there you have it. This was the day we brought Oliver home, my second child, and I think when I look at this picture, I can't help but think of the kind of unconscious archive of images that I keep in my head, which I think, again, is another kind of a essential thing for a lot of photographers. I'm a photo teacher, and over the years I've heard a million times, like, I don't want to look at work, I don't want to be influenced. And I just think, like, you're nuts, you're just nuts, Because the first person I ever heard say it was Bill Burke in a talk, and he was describing that it's almost like he has this library in his head, and that he wasn't afraid to admit that when he took certain pictures, those other pictures would flash before his eyes, almost like they were being like accessed, And so, I love photographs, and I love photographers, and so I'm sure that when I took this picture, that picture Lee Friedlander took of his wife Maria like this, went through my head, and so I'm perfectly happy to rely on those that archive of imagery to influence the way I make pictures. So one thing that comes up is that, and it's something I've like people have asked me about in the past, and I think it's worth asking, is I'm aware of the anonymity of like the figures in the pictures. I think Vanessa may be the closest she comes to being seen is like the orchid picture, where you can actually see her eyes through those flowers. And I have some different thoughts on that, which I'll share with you now. One thing is that it goes back to that kind of original interest in photography's ability, that tension between description and concealment, and just it just being tantalizing to me. That photography can keep secrets at the same time saying so much. But with that, it also made, I think it does something in allowing the work to perhaps be a little bit more universal in viewers' ability to sort of relate to it or enter into it. That maybe becomes a little bit less about my family experience and more of just a family experience. And also, it may very well be that subconsciously, it's some sort of a act on my part to sort of protect my family a little bit. I came up as to me, by the time I was a young photographer, so many of the great projects that I was being shown were of family members shot by the photographer. So it had really never occurred to me that until I made the work and prepared to exhibit it, that there might be something tricky about that, because the world that I existed in, it was completely normal to photograph your family, and somebody like Sally Mann, you understood the controversy, but you thought, these squares don't get it, but then it's a different thing when all of a sudden you create the work and prepare to exhibit it, and a little feeling of but I think in a lot of the pictures there's this kind of feeling of calmness and stillness, and I really love that. It's such an immersive and insane experience a lot of the time that these pictures, a lot of the times when that calmness and stillness allows me to finally kind of process that experience and actually look at it kind of from outside of the immediate situation. But more often than not, the house looks like this, and so those are kind of represented in the work too. This element of chaos, where things seem to be a little bit unhinged, and it is that too. It is that calmness and that stillness and that kind of elegance, and it also is, feeding frenzies on the couch and things like that. So let's see. These are just some other images that aren't represented in the show here. So I'm getting to a point now where I've taken so many bathtub photographs that I really don't totally understand what, do I keep on shooting in that bathtub? I am, but I already have 2 bathtub pictures I like. And so I didn't feel as though I could show two of them in here, but I really need a third one. And I'm becoming a little bit more aware of their preferences as they get older, you know. And so recently I had two photographs published in the literary magazine Oxford American, and it came in the mail, and I showed it to Wyatt, who's 6 now, you know. And he looked completely unable to process what he was looking at because he was in both of the photographs, you know. And so it becomes, I become aware of it as time passes that they're going to have more of a role in kind of the way these pictures live in the world. And so at this point, I assume that I'll always photograph them. It seems unlikely that I would stop, but I don't know what my feelings are kind of moving forward. Because part of the thing is, we look at this Gowan picture here, which is one of my favorite Gowan photographs. Just a quick story. I went to Missouri State University, and so Springfield, Missouri, so kind of right in the Bible Belt. And there was a photo collector who was out of Kansas City, I think, and he wanted to bring his collection out for an exhibition at the school. And so this was on the flyer, and it went around, the flyer was around school, and then there was a Christian organization on school who called for a boycott of the show because they felt like this was somehow like an obscene photograph, you know. And it had just never occurred to me in a million years that this could be taken as something like, I guess sexual, you know, is the only way I can describe it. And so with that, I kind of understand that one of the great things about photography, like the power of it, like the muscularity of the medium, is the ambiguity, you know, is the fact that as a viewer, I love photographs that leave enough room for me to sort of participate in it. So that I'm not just sort of like a disconnected viewer, but actually like I'm filling in the last blank, you know, that there's kind of like there's blanks left in the work, and my own experiences and my own interpretation are sort of the last part of completing that little journey, you know. But the fact that if that's true, then allowing people to sort of fill in that last part with their own kind of interpretation also leaves it open to great possibilities for misunderstanding or misuse or all of those things. So my intentions may be clear to myself and clear to my wife, but the way they're kind of they are made leaves some opportunity for some dangerous places, you know. So with that, it's something I'm always aware of, and there's certain pictures that I've sort of pulled back on and have not used just because of kind of how much they show, you know, and which feels disappointing to me and a little bit limiting, but at the same time, you know, I got this family that I want to protect as well. So I'll end with these two photographs because of all the ones I've shown you, I just like to end with these two here, which show my wife's face very clearly, you know, and I think she looks really beautiful. And particularly with this photograph here, do you remember which kid that was? Okay, the second. And then of course, the third child was born just recently, Luella, who's in the background, I think maybe unconscious now. So that's it. And love if there's any questions, love to try to answer those for you. Yes?
I'm looking around at the work today. I was here last night during the opening. And I read the artist's statement and how much of the way we're supposed to perceive the work is from your perspective as a parent. But as being a young parent, a lot of the thrill of that I understand, because I'm not a parent. It's this sort of vicarious connection to the way that your children experience the world around them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work seems to show like a challenge with object permanence, or like what, unlike Weston's photograph of the sun, there's a lot more sort of visceral intimacy to much closer work. Was this, do you feel that? Do you believe that? And if so, would this be a way for you to resist going to this very formal approach, or the visual archive that you say that you're sort of having to resist a little bit and making the work?
I see. Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like, to have children is this opportunity to experience the world in a way that's difficult to access without them, you know. I mean, maybe largely because they don't allow it any other way, you know. But I think if anybody's ever had anything critical to say about the work, is that it's maybe too formally driven, you know. It just depends on your taste, you know. I've had people sort of wish that it told them something more about like who my family was, you know. But to me, I'm just not interested in that, you know. Once it becomes too specific to me, that specificity sort of dampens the mood for me, you know. It sort of restricts access to me in some ways for the viewer, you know. And I think that there's maybe, to me, there's larger things that might be able to be discussed and experienced in relation to the pictures if it's less about like my particular world and more about more universal kind of experiences of just being human.
Yeah. I mean, does that happen on the editing side?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think it does. Our mutual friend Jana was here last night, and she was explaining to her boyfriend, like, she says, yeah, Josh is a photographer, you know, he kind of shoots like this. And I was like, I didn't even notice that. You know? So the selection process is hugely important, and I think really where the work gets shaped, you know. I think that based on the pictures I've taken, the final result could really exist in many different versions of it that sort of operate in different ways. And so I don't know about the rest of you guys, but like the further I get along in practicing photography, the more value I place in the selection process, and not the less I take into, but it's of great significance. And I think a lot of those choices that you're describing that I have to consider take place when I'm actually deciding which pictures to use and how they relate to one another, rather than when I'm actually taking the picture. Because when I'm taking the picture, I mean, I don't think I'm thinking much of anything at all. I don't think I would be interested in being a photographer if I was thinking that much. At the end of the day, photography, like as I'm sure it is for most of us in this room, is just some kind of access to the present, you know. And me kind of thinking about the meaning of what I'm about to take a picture of is not going to assist me in that blissful state of not worrying about the past and the future, you know.
It's completely obvious you're not in any of these photos. What kind of conversation are you having with yourself about you being in the context of documenting your family? Totally.
It's a really valid question, you know, and I've been asked it before, and I still don't have a particularly great answer, you know. There we go. Okay. I would like to think, and this may be wishful thinking, that my presence in the work is felt through the persistence of the way I see, you know. But that may be hopeful, you know. I think that I've often thought about what it would be like to actually involve myself in the pictures. At this point right now, I don't know. I've never felt compelled to do it. You know, I'm always. It always seems like one extra step that I'm not sure that I can achieve at that moment. That getting the picture off itself, but it's always something I'm asked, and it always is something that I don't have a great answer for. My wife photographs me quite a bit as well, and so in the spring we're going to do a collaborative show in San Francisco, And I'm kind of wondering if that maybe the act of collaboration with my spouse, maybe we'll start to explore that possibility in an interesting way.
Thank you.
Yeah, Beth. Yeah.
It's more of an observation than a question, but I'm curious about your response to this. But hearing you talk about all of these kind of things going on and your progression from the work that you were interested in before to then doing this family work, partly because of necessity or kind of where you found yourself.
Yeah.
Something that is striking to me about it is it really speaks to the distance or this kind of tension or this effort to kind of have your own self continue while you're in this intense experience of all of your time and energy and focus and lack of sleep being on these creatures who are in your life.
Yeah.
And how that's one of the difficulties of early child parenting. And so it's both, I think that comes through in the photographs in a way that some people might find disturbing, but and because of the formalness, because of what you're talking about, like this picture of Wyatt, a typical family photograph, you're interested in the kid, but you're not looking at the kid.
Yeah. Right.
You're interested in something else. And it's people who might be like, wait a minute, you're supposed to always be interested in your kid. What are you doing? Why are you not taking a snapshot of the baby?
Right.
And that also speaks to the distance of photography, the act of taking a photograph, you're distancing yourself from the intimate relationship. And so it seems like it captures that in a general sense, but also speaks to potentially, one, your struggle to maintain that, and a potential ambivalence about the experience, which you've kind of talked about. A very difficult time in life, early parenting, and a shock. So it's just
Absolutely. And in some ways it's so confusing, and it's difficult to see things when you're kind of like in the eye of the storm. And so it's the way I've sort of like I've created a life, like a way in which I can try to understand the world. And in this way I'm kind of deciphering the world through its physicality in a way, like the way things look and the way like those buckets, like the roundness of the edge of those buckets, the way that pops up in that photograph, and the kind of the rhythm of those shapes as they exist in that picture. And I think later on they allow me to reflect on aspects of my experience in a way that wouldn't be possible if I just was going straight for I don't know, like one of my children, cutting their arm or something, or a picture about their their meltdown at their first birthday, or something like that, So rather than stories about the experience, kind of little poetic vignettes